Hello, hello. Hope y'all can hear me. Good morning, everybody. We're going to be starting this live. Everybody come in, filter in. We'll give y'all a couple minutes, couple seconds, to everybody come in. We'll get this discussion about indigenizing arts education. We got an educator, we got a teacher, two spirit, you know. So she's been doing this work, and I'm excited to get this discussion. I've been always wanting to talk to someone that's doing the work in the classroom, and see how what knowledge I can gain from this, because we all looking for knowledge, and here I am talking about indigenize the world. Let's talk about people actually indigenizing the education, arts education. A lot of our kids, they want to do arts degrees. They want to, do creative content. They want to start directing. They want to start doing theater. They want to start, doing a lot of this stuff. So, okay, let's talk to someone who's doing it right now. And what are they learning? How are they teaching them? Okay, so we're getting them in right now. Yeah, I just joined the live. I sent you an invite. You should just go to the invites and accept. Right, we're talking about indigenizing arts education. Hopefully, yeah, just join the live. Unable to join. Uh-oh. Let me invite you again. Yes. Let's see, I invited you. All right.
Hey.
Hello. Good afternoon.
How
Can you
are
hear
you?
me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you for doing this live. Um, we are here talking with Emily.
Emmy.
Um, Emmy
Yeah.
Aguilar. And
hmm
right now you're coming out of, I believe, Texas.
Yep, I'm in Texas, so I'm coming from what's currently Austin, Texas. I'm a an arts educator, and these are my homelands. This is where my father's from, and where I'm from. And my people span two borders, so I'm technically both Mexican and American. And so that's where I'm at. hmm
Awesome. And I caught your page, and I automatically followed and liked and shared a lot of your content. I love what you're doing, and but I would like to hear your journey becoming an educator and the importance of Indigenous education, especially in the arts. Can you share that with
hmm
us?
Yeah, so I'm specifically a theater educator, but I also have taught a lot of other Indigenous arts. I started out as a teaching artist about 10 years ago, or a little more than 10 years ago. And then I became a full-time professor. Um, and I left academia 3 years ago to focus on being in a K-12 classroom. And so I'm currently a middle school theater teacher.
All right.
Before that, I was the director of education for the Indigenous Cultures Institute, which is the nonprofit that my tribe runs, Mia Con Garces. And so once I had to leave that position to take on an academic job, I was in that academic job for about 3 years. And academia just wasn't for me. I felt very stifled. I felt, harmed in a lot of ways. And so I left academia, and now I'm working full time with young people. I started the Indigenizing Arts Ed page just about 5 months ago, so it's very new. Um, and I started it because I was not seeing Indigenous arts educators represented. So mostly what I was seeing was non-native arts educators, right, and like mostly white. And um, what I was seeing was very colonial, very European, Eurocentric, and just not what I'm interested in or how I teach, and not for the young people that I work with. Um, and so that was making me feel really resentful. And
Hmm.
then I realized, like, if there's this gap that I'm seeing that isn't happening, then I can just make it happen. So I started this page, and it kind of took off. I've made a lot of really great connections, really great relationships with people across the U.S. From different nations and people that are also non-native, and so that's been really cool. Um, and the focus of the work, the focus of the page is for Indigenous arts educators, but I also welcome non-native arts educators and um, educators across all areas to engage in learning as well.
Yeah, I see it, and these stories, these individuals such as yourself, a lot of the work and who's teaching our kids, we can see these people, we don't see these faces. We hear about the school board education, indigenous education, so i'm I'm grateful that you're in a space such as a middle school, because this is where the kids are like a sponge, and they're a lot of what they're inspiring to be happens at this age of awareness, and of what you like, what you don't like, of who you are and your identity and what you want to become when you get older, So a lot of these thoughts start becoming concrete and start being, these seeds are being planted. So I'm very proud that you are in the place where you are, reaching these kids at a young age, because this is where we are. I wish I had a teacher in my school district teaching, such as yourself, and my kids being with you all day and as much as some point of the day, so the community is very lucky to have you there. As far as arts education, and I'm sure there's been a lot of setbacks. Like, what are some of those, realizations and overcomings of trying to fill these spaces with your knowledge and education?
Yeah, so I work in a public school, and I think this is probably the case in most places across the US. The arts are not valued in public schools.
Yeah.
The arts are usually only valued in arts-based schools, and there's not very many of those, especially in Texas. So in the school that I work in, the arts are certainly not valued. I'm kind of seen, and the arts are kind of seen because we have an art, visual art classroom, and then my theater classroom, and and the arts are kind of seen as like an extra thing, as just kind of um, not important, as extracurricular, right? Even though it's a classroom, it's a class that they have during the day. It's not seen as valid or real learning or rigorous or important, right? And so that's really disheartening, because then young people do take that on. They learn to not value the arts when they hear words being used with adults in the school. So teachers that I have a relationship with in the school, that I have a good relationship with, that see the value, right? They'll sort of be on that trail of like talking with young people about why they're going to be grateful to have this background, right? But then on the opposite end, you'll have like administrators or other people who they might be like, oh yeah, theater is fun or visual art is fun, but they're not saying, oh, visual art is important, or look at how you're learning about your culture, or look at how your teachers are prioritizing your languages in their classrooms, right, which no other teachers are doing. So you're not hearing things like that, except for from a few individuals, and so that's really disheartening. I would also say walking into like social studies classrooms, and hearing the ways that we're erased, the ways that Native people are erased. Just this past week, I walked into a classroom to support a teacher, and I heard that teacher teaching about the Bering Strait theory, which I was just like, what? Like,
Hmm.
this has been debunked. Why is this being taught? And then also talking about Hopi creation story, and then saying, but these are just stories, right? The science shows us something else. And I was just like, that is so violent, right? And so just it's exhausting to have to constantly be like teaching people, because I'm the only Native teacher in the school. It's
Mm.
really exhausting to be teaching people all the time who don't who operate as if we don't exist, right? And I'm not only the only Native teacher in the school, but I'm also the only Native teacher from the place where they're sitting, right? So it just feels really violent a lot of the time.
Yep, and exhausting. I'm sure that is exhausting, and I understood that. You know, working with communities and trying to help push their messages, and you're in the community that's causing the destruction, right? And causing the living out the systemic racism, the economic. You know, they know these things. You're talking to the you know the senators, the councils. You know, you're talking to these people that actually can do something about it, and they're there to hear what you say, but their actions know, and their actions are saying, well, we're not going to do anything, we can't do anything, you know, it's too late. There's always something that's in their mind blocking it, when really all we got to do is give you more space and time, you know, give the natives more space and time, give them the resources, you know. Indigenous art, you know, I've been researching and getting ready for this, and a constant theme, and it goes together, of course, is art, is the trauma. You know, they don't see the importance of it because their trauma might be, they not be, the non-natives might not be aware of the trauma that's happening through the art and healing, you know, and indigenous art, indigenizing arts education, you know, that's a huge part of it, is our healing of the trauma that we share, that we want to share, you know, or don't want to share, but we want to tell it a different way, you know. So it's, they don't understand that, and I'm sure some of the truth that we share from our traumas, it's a hard, you know, it's hard for them to swallow, because these traumas are still living with us, you know, and such as rape, such as abuse, such as being displaced, you know, feeling alone, isolated, depression, anxieties, you know, it all comes from somewhere, but ours come from a lot of colonial oppression that's still happening today by policies and through, you know, people that, board of directors, school boards that don't want to help our education, teach our education of local history, about the local indigenous peoples, and promoting that. And they want to indigenize, you know, education. Well, that's okay. Well, there's so many ways to do that. You know, there's so many ways to do that. So I know that indigenizing arts education, you're dealing with trauma, you know, because most of the greatest art comes from pain, comes from life experience, you know. So before I get all into that, your theater is a form of art. How
Mhm.
are you taking it? How is there stories? Is
Mhm.
there what are you doing with an indigenizing theater?
Yeah. So one of my favorite one of my favorite things is that when students have me for theater, the first play that they learn about, the first story that they hear, is a Guatecan story. So it's from our people here where they are. And specifically, it was written by my tia, this play called Yanawana's Legend of the Blue Bonnet. And that comes from our creation story of how the bluebonnets came to be. And the bluebonnets are only here in Texas. They're nowhere else in the
Mm-hmm.
world, and that's because they were a gift from the creator. And our story is that there's this young girl who's maybe about 13, 14, and she's noticing that all of these people in her community are dying, and her grandmother, her Keese, had given her this doll, this woven doll, and she offers this doll into the fire and like prays that her people will have water because they're dying, they don't have water. And then this dream comes to her, and in the dream a deer leads her to water. On this really long journey, leads her to water, and she comes from the dream and she tells her people, I know where the water is, I know where the water is. She goes, then they come back and all of their lands are covered in these bluebonnets. So it's this idea of, um, sacrificing something for your people, and then Creator blessing you with, right, these flowers, these bluebonnets. And so for us, the bluebonnets are really connected to the water here. Um, and the play Yanawana's Legend of the Bluebonnet tells that story through theater, but also there's songs and there's danza, and the young people get to see this, and they get to meet with the actors and the creators as well. This past year, because of COVID, instead of taking them to the theater, I was able to show them a recording of the play, and then I also had them do a live Q&A with the whole creative team. And they did that with our whole school. So that was really awesome. Um, and that's the first play that my students see, is a play with Native people, right? But to these kids, what they're seeing is brown people on stage that look like them, right? So the
Hmm.
first play they're seeing is brown people that look like them. I know for me, the first play I saw was all white people.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, theater is viewed as this European thing, but actually we've had theater, we've had performance and performing arts in our communities for millennia, right?
Hmm.
And so I just love that the very first interaction that most of these young people have is with a native play, with my people specifically, and that then I can explain to them the creation story. I can explain to them the connection with the water here, and I can make connections with science. I can make connection with social studies, with history, right? And they make all of those connections themselves too. So that's probably one of my favorite things to do is teach them that play.
I think it's a book. That book, it has a children's book.
Yeah. Yeah,
We
but the
got it.
book the book is not written from our perspective though.
Oh, okay.
So the play is written from our perspective. The book gets some things wrong, but yeah, the book, if you have the book, it's a good basis to start. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we got it. I read it. I got it for my daughter and nieces.
I love that.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's amazing that you're you have a play, and we need more of them. And I'm sure that because there's so many within this digital era and within these applications that make you want to create videos. Some of them are acting. At least a lot of these kids, they are acting. They're getting some skills. No matter they're doing little skits on TikTok, dancing, little raps here and there. They're creating, and that's what I want people to kind of see. Like with these applications, you can get your message across. And you just got to know a little bit, do a little research of how you want to get that across, how you want to do it, how you want to edit, what software you need. What you don't need much, but if you want to get good quality, you might need this. So, but it is possible, and that's what I want to share with these people. People are doing this work, and within these pandemics, you had to modify your teaching too. And but there's so much information out there.
Hmm.
How can we get, because you are an educator, you have all hands on into a lot of other circles of where to get indigenous education, knowledge, platforms, workshops. You have a Patreon and you share such knowledge. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, the Patreon is new. I just started the Patreon this past month. I was nervous about starting it because I felt like maybe I shouldn't be monetizing my knowledge. But at the end of the day, people want more content, and so that was a good way to do that. In the Patreon, people get a monthly toolkit, so a packet of resources, a packet of teaching strategies, teachings, and then I also have one part of the toolkit that's just about like all things native. So like things that are going on in the world, right? Obviously there's stuff in there about like line 3, stop line 3, and just a lot of things that are going on. And so it's like educating, because the majority of the people that are subscribing to my Patreon are non-native. There's a lot of educating, and then resources. want to be clear about like my perspective, which is that um, I believe that only Indigenous people can indigenize anything, and I think that that's our work and that's what we can do. I think that other people, they can decolonize, they can diversify, you know, whatever that work is. But I think that if you're non-native, you can't indigenize. Like if you're not an indigenous person, you're not indigenizing anything. And that's just my perspective. So like it's kind of this balance of in my Patreon and in my work, a lot of the audience is native, a lot of the audience is non-native. So I'm trying to offer content for both and also uplift other native educators because obviously I'm just one person and my people is just one people, right? Like we're not all the same, right? There's a lot of diversity in all the different tribes and nations and communities. So um, being really clear, like this is my perspective, right? Like in the toolkit, I like, for example, one thing that I shared was how I'm seeing a lot of people take on, um, appropriate native life ways in really harmful ways. So, for example, like making offerings, smudging, right, um, with medicines that are endangered and all of that. Um, and I recently became aware of something I had heard about people doing, which is like taking water from people's sacred waters and I just think that that's not okay. And so I was teaching that like this is what I was taught. That's not okay. So I just know
Hmm.
for our waters, like don't take our water. Don't be mixing waters from elsewhere with our water. Don't take our water and mix it with elsewhere. Um, and that was like from my perspective. So I'm constantly trying to be really clear. Like this is what I was taught. This is um, this is my point of view for our people. And of course, I also do get things wrong sometimes, right? Like just last night, I was on the phone with my elders and they corrected me about something. And I'm always so grateful when they correct me about things that I'm saying that are incorrect because otherwise I wouldn't know. And right, I'm only 31 years old, I'm still learning compared to them where they've been, you know, praying in this world for over 80 years. So um, I am always humbled to learn from them and I can only pass on what I know.
Yeah, that is true. And I'm glad that you kind of got into that indigenizing and decolonizing. That's very wide range. Those words hold a lot of weight, and there's so much you can get into with just bringing decolonize up. Like, what is that? What is that? What is indigenizing? Um,
Yeah, I have a workshop coming up with this arts organization in New York City, and originally they were asking about the Indigenizing Arts Ed, and so I had to ask them like, who is your audience? Is your audience non-native? And the answer is yes. So I had to be really clear, like we can do a decolonizing arts ed workshop because that's y'all's work, right? But you can't indigenize anything. So just having to be like constantly teaching people the difference.
that's good because as someone that's doing it, for me, I have a hard time of I have found the word indigenize. I first, what took me on this journey was becoming, a rapper, MC, indigenize the world, and then I started because of my awakening of decolonizing, you know, I went to some indigenous youth camps and they're like, decolonize, decolonize, decolonize. And I was like, there has to be in the English words, there has to be something you're decolonizing. There has to be something you're putting in replace. And I found the word indigenize, and then I found so many. I'll type that in Google, and I find so many knowledge of indigenizing universities, indigenizing education, arts education, indigenizing industries, indigenizing design, architecture design, and so there's many people doing it right now, and for me, it's our representation as just like yourself, it has there's who's doing it and what are you trying to get across. A lot of these, it might sound good, but and it might look good, but it's not really true, you know. So hopefully, as we're doing this knowledge of indigenizing and decolonizing, we're getting the true points. You know, as some of my work of solidarity work with other indigenous tribes, you know, I've always tried to, as indigenous supporter, creator, artist, you know, try to put their message first always if I'm there to support. And I'm not there for me as an artist to promote indigenize, promote them, you know. So it's like the people have to be aware of their influence, because you have influence, and what's the message and who should we be listening to, you know. So it's, as someone who knows things and as an educator, as a teacher, you know, I seen one of your Instagram posts, you know, it has that, it talks about that, being a teacher. And as we all have a come to time to be, pass the knowledge on, you know. And that's indigenizing teaching, you know. Indigenize is a verb, you know, and it's rooted. And so what are your words to fill these gaps? Indigenizing for me is coming back to making people realize I'm not indigenizing, I'm more or less sharing my Diné knowledge. You know, these are the words. It's like a bridge to the source. I guess indigenize is the word, like a bridge. I'm still having a hard time to figure out. This word is catchy, like decolonize, but it's like a bridge to bring people in, and either for business, education, or your sacred knowledge.
Well, that was part of why I chose the word indigenize for Indigenizing Arts Ed, is I wanted it to be really clear, like this is an account for Indigenous arts educators first, right, before anyone else.
Yeah.
And you know, when I'm speaking, I'm first speaking to them. Like everyone else is not the priority. If you learn, like that's awesome. But I'm also seeing that with the word decolonize, and I'm seeing a lot of people use the word decolonize when they're not actually decolonizing anything, and they're actually
Hmm.
they're not invested in decolonizing, right? They're actually invested in upholding this settler country, right? And these settler values. And when they're using the word decolonize, what they actually mean is like diversify, or make more equitable, or make more brown, or make more this or that, right? That's not decolonize, right? Just because you make something more diverse is not decolonizing it. Decolonization is not pretty, right? It's not going to be pretty. Um,
Yep.
and as we're seeing in Palestine, right? And
Hmm.
so and it is war. It's ongoing war, right? Because the government is not going to allow us to decolonize easily. And
Hmm.
so when people use the word decolonize, if they're not talking about Indigenous people, if they're not talking about land back, if they're not talking about protecting the water, if they're not talking about Indigenous children, if they're not talking about our ancestors, um, and keeping oil in the ground, right? Then they're not talking about decolonizing anything. And so I feel like that buzzword has just become a replacement for diversify, or something similar to that.
Hmm. Well, I would like to give these last, you know, couple minutes to you and your message. Say there's indigenous teacher, indigenous student want to become an educator, be doing the theater art. They're in school right now, you know, trying to figure out this is where's it going to lead me, you know, and they're having a difficult time of saying I'm going to stick to this. You know, my people do need educators. You know, my community needs this. We do need it. You know, what's your message for these young, striving educators, teachers?
Yeah, we do need more Indigenous educators, that's for sure. I think we specifically need more Indigenous schools, specifically for our people, run by our communities. And so I would encourage that. In my link in my bio, I actually have a link to a teacher training program, an Indigenous teacher training program that people can access. And then I would also send people to the Indigenous Educators page. Their Instagram is amazing, and they're doing a lot of good work. Um, and you know, there are a lot of Indigenous teaching programs. I didn't go through an Indigenous teaching program. I went through a traditional Western European teaching program. But I, you know, thankfully was able to like keep my lens and be able to see things like, okay, I don't agree with this, or this is how I would think about it. And that takes work. So I would say, like, if you have access to programs that your people are leading, definitely do that so that you aren't encountering so much harm. And if you have the opportunity to teach in a native school run by native people, do that, because otherwise you're just going to be really exhausted. Um, and also, I would say, like, it's not just about teaching in formal K-12 settings, right? Like, there are a lot of people that are teachers, that are educators, that are not in a classroom, you know? There's a lot of ways that you can teach and educate that are not in a classroom. And, you know, like, for example, we have this summer camp that we run through the Indigenous Cultures Institutes, and a lot of those teachers are not formal teachers, right? But for us, that's not what, it doesn't matter necessarily if you have a degree, right? That's not about who holds knowledge. There's plenty of people that hold knowledge that don't have degrees. So I think, like, do what feels good and do what feels true, because otherwise it's just going to feel really hard.
Yeah, that is. And it gets hard. It gets hard, especially when you're by yourself, you know, and which a lot of people that are striving to create change, we often find ourselves alone, you know. Um, there's no one else going to give you this knowledge, what you want, the answers you are seeking. Most likely, they're up to you to find them and to fulfill them, you know. And, you know, for me, that's the message I try to push and to keep and to show people that there's people doing it right
Mm-hmm.
now. You know, you're an educator and you're preparing for next week, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I commend you on all your work, especially in these pandemics. Another one, and we're surviving. You're surviving. I'm glad that you are healthy, and you had the time to do this interview with me. You know, I support everything that you're doing, and for everybody that's following, listening, support the page Indigenizing Arts Ed. Her Patreon, all the links on her link tree. You know, share the content. You know, this is something that we need to be sharing.
Mm-hmm.
It's knowledge. It's knowledge
Mm-hmm.
that should be striving. And if you have anybody that's trying to find sources, resources for Indigenous art teaching skills, you know, here she
Mm-hmm.
is. You know, Indigenous
Yeah.
Indigenizing Arts Education. And
Yeah.
so I thank you, and I hope you get better, get well soon. You
Thank you.
know, and if you have anything else you would like to promote, share, you know, I'm always here to help.
Yeah, I just want to add that I was listening to your Spotify, so I would shout you out too, because that was really awesome. This morning I was feeling really, like, low energy, and I listened to your playlist, and that really lifted me up. So I just want to honor all the work that you're doing as well.
Thank you. Yeah, more to come. I'm trying to get back to it. I'm trying to get back to it. But thank you so much. Have a blessed day.
Thank you. You too.
All right. See you later.
Bye.
Awesome, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed that live, man. It was very powerful. I love talking to people, you know, Indigenous people. Follow her page. This is Indigenizing Arts Ed, you know, and this is Indigenize the World. It's only right. Indigenize the world. You know, follow the TikToks, follow the YouTube, follow the Twitch, for different content, of course, but most likely what you'll find here is Indigenizing IG live interviews. And if you have anybody that want to be promoted, your friend, your artist, your auntie, your uncle, you want to say something, got a message for the world, let me know. We'll set up an interview, we'll set up a live, and we'll share the links. We'll get your message out. Hope y'all have a good weekend, a good life, and we'll see you guys on the next live very soon. Until then, keep creating and fuck these haters.